She didn't cry when they took her children. She couldn't, because the moment she made a sound, they pulled them farther away. Her youngest kept reaching for her, crying, calling her mother, until the sound disappeared into silence. That was the last time she held them. And from that moment on, she wasn't trying to be free anymore. She was just trying to survive long enough to find her children again. She was sold away, but a mother never stopped fighting. She didn't scream when they tore her children from her arms, not because it didn't hurt, but because the moment she tried to reach for them, they struck her down. Her youngest was crying, not loudly anymore, just small, broken sounds, reaching for her with tiny, shaking hands. "Mama!" That was the last word she heard before the wagon doors slammed shut. And in that moment, something inside her shattered. Not her spirit, her heart. The road was long and merciless. Chains rubbed against her wrists with every movement of the wagon. Dust filled the air, sticking to her skin, mixing with tears she refused to let fall again. Around her, others sat in silence, some whispering prayers, others staring into nothing. But she wasn't thinking about herself. She was counting memories. The way her daughter used to braid wildflowers into her hair. The way her son would fall asleep against her shoulder after long days. Small things, ordinary things, things that now felt like treasures she might never see again. Days passed, or maybe weeks. Time stopped meaning anything. When they finally arrived at the new plantation, it felt colder, not in temperature, but in spirit. The overseer there ruled with violence. Work started before sunrise and ended long after dark. Food was scarce, punishments were public. Fear lived in every corner. But fear no longer controlled her, because there is something stronger than fear. A mother who has lost her children. At night, when the others slept, she lay awake staring at the wooden ceiling above her. Every creak sounded like a memory. Every whisper of wind felt like her children calling her name. She didn't allow herself to imagine them suffering. That thought was too dangerous. Instead, she imagined them waiting for her to come. That belief, whether true or not, kept her breathing. Weeks turned into months. She learned to listen more than speak. She memorized the guards' routines, which ones drank too much at night, which ones grow lazy during storms, when the dogs were tied, when patrols rode out. She stored every detail carefully inside her mind, because she knew something no one else did. She was going back, even if it killed her. One evening, while carrying feed near the barn, she overheard something that made her heart stop. A trader speaking about moving supplies north in early winter. North. The word echoed in her chest like thunder. Her children had been sold north. She didn't know how far. She didn't know to whom. But north meant closer, and closer meant possible. That night she didn't sleep at all. For the first time since being sold, hope felt real enough to touch. But hope was dangerous. If she tried and failed, she would never see her children again. If she stayed, she might never see them anyway. So she made her choice. She would run. Not because she was brave, but because doing nothing felt like slowly dying. She began preparing in silence, saving scraps of food in hidden cloth, studying the stars when she could see them, listening to whispered directions from older workers who once lived further north. She never spoke of her plan, not even to those she trusted, because the more people who knew, the greater the risk. And this was not just escape. This was a mother's war. Then the storm came. It arrived suddenly, dark clouds swallowing the sky, thunder cracking like gunfire. Rain poured down so heavily it drowned out sound itself. Most people feared storms. She saw opportunity. Rain washed away footprints. Thunder covered noise. Patrol stayed sheltered when lightning struck. Her heart pounded violently as she waited for the right moment. Every second felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Then she stepped outside. The rain hit her skin like ice, soaking her clothes instantly. Mud swallowed her feet as she moved toward the tree line. She didn't run at first. Running meant panic. Panic meant mistakes. She moved carefully, quietly. Every step away from the cabin felt unreal. Every step toward the forest felt like stepping into the unknown. But she didn't look back, because looking back might break her. The forest welcomed her with darkness. Branches scratched her arms. Roots tried to trip her. Wind howled through trees like distant voices calling her name. More than once she froze, certain someone was behind her, but it was only the storm, only fear trying to catch up. Hours passed. Her body began to ache. Hunger clawed at her stomach. Her feet burned from walking through mud and stones. Still, she moved north, guided by nothing but memory and desperate love. Near dawn, the storm weakened. The sky turned gray. She stumbled toward a small stream and collapsed beside it, gasping for breath. The water was freezing as she drank, but it cleared her thoughts for a moment. She looked at her reflection, dirty, exhausted, unrecognizable, but her eyes were alive and determined. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if she never found them? What if she was too late? That thought nearly crushed her. But then she remembered the last sound her youngest made. Mama. That single word became her strength. She pushed herself to stand. She would walk until her legs refused. She would crawl if she had to. She would survive long enough to try, because going back was not an option. As the first light of morning spread through the trees, a distant sound broke the silence. A horn, then another. Her absence had been discovered. The hunt had begun. She closed her eyes for one brief second, not in fear, in promise. "I'm coming," she whispered into the cold air, and then she disappeared deeper into the forest. The forest was cold. Every step she took, mud sucking at her feet, her clothes soaked, body shaking from exhaustion. Rain from last night still clung to her hair and skin. Her breath came in short, jagged bursts, each one a reminder that she was alive and alone. Somewhere behind her, the plantation disappeared into the mist, but the fear remained. The horn she had heard in the morning wasn't just a signal, it was a promise. They were coming. They always came for those who dared to run. She paused near a bend in the river, crouching low, trying to steady her racing heart. Her hands trembled, not from the cold alone, but from the knowledge of how close death always seemed. Her mind wandered, even for a moment, to her children, her daughter's tiny fingers curling around hers, her son's laughter in the golden light of their old home. The memory was painful, but necessary. Every heartbeat that recalled them fueled her determination. She wasn't running for herself anymore, she was running for them. The trees around her were thickening, shadows twisting in strange shapes. She moved carefully, silent as a wisp, each step calculated. One wrong move, one crack of a branch, and the pursuers would find her. She had no map, no compass, only memory, intuition, and a desperate hope that north lay ahead. Sometimes she whispered their names to herself. It was foolish, maybe dangerous, but she could not stop. Hours passed. Hunger gnawed at her belly. Fatigue weighed her legs down. Her lungs burned from every effort to climb over roots, slide down muddy slopes, cross the river at its shallowest point. But she kept going. Night fell. Darkness thickened like a curtain, and the forest sounds changed. Owls called in the distance. Crickets whispered among the leaves. Somewhere water trickled over rocks. It should have been peaceful, but she could not relax. Every rustle, every crack, every animal sound felt like a warning. A branch snapped under her foot. She froze instantly, pressed herself against a tree, listening. Nothing followed. Only the wind moved through the treetops. She exhaled slowly, relief washing over her, but it was temporary. The danger never left. Memories surged. She remembered the moment they were taken, the wagon, the shouting, the sound of her children crying for her. Every face she had loved felt lost. She clenched her fists, biting her lip to keep from crying. The tears would slow her, and she couldn't afford that. She pressed on, crawling over fallen logs, stepping through knee-deep mud. A river stretched before her, reflecting the faint moonlight like silver shards. Crossing it would be dangerous. The water was cold and the current strong. She hesitated only a moment before plunging in. The cold bit into her skin. Her teeth chattered. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she pushed herself forward, dragging her body across slippery rocks. At last she reached the other side, soaked and shivering, but alive and closer to her children. Somewhere nearby she imagined the sounds of horses' hooves and men shouting. They were close. She knew it. She could almost hear their voices carried by the wind. Her heart pounded so fiercely she thought they might hear it. She pressed herself flat against the earth, trying to blend into the shadows. Her wet hair clung to her face. Her breath came in short, controlled bursts. One false move, one sound too loud, and she could lose everything, her life and the chance to ever find her children again. Memories of her children returned with painful clarity. She recalled her daughter trying to pick wildflowers from the yard and dropping them in her lap. Her son running through the fields laughing, chasing after a butterfly. She whispered their names quietly to herself, imagining the sound of their voices, holding on to them like a lifeline. Her legs refused to keep moving. Hunger and exhaustion made every step a battle, but she forced herself forward, remembering why she risked everything. Fear existed only in those who stopped moving, and she could not stop, not for herself, not for her children. She stumbled into a small clearing, shivering and nearly collapsing. Moonlight bathed her face, and she caught sight of herself in a puddle. She was dirty, bruised, unrecognizable, but her eyes still held fire. Determination burned there, and hope, fragile but alive, flickered in her gaze. She needed to rest, just a little. She pulled herself behind a large tree, pressing her back against its rough bark. She closed her eyes, imagining her children waiting somewhere, safe. She let herself imagine them reaching for her again. The thought was almost unbearable. Pain and hope intertwined so tightly she didn't know which dominated. Suddenly, a sound froze her in place. A twig snapped in the distance. She held her breath, heart thudding so loudly she thought it might betray her. Footsteps, faint, careful, but unmistakable. Someone was following her. She didn't move. She couldn't. Every muscle in her body screamed to run, but she forced herself to stay still, pressed flat against the earth. She pictured her children. She pictured their faces. Their safety depended on her not being found. The footsteps grew closer. Her pulse surged. Her throat grew dry. She could almost feel the presence of the men behind her, the danger inches away. One wrong move, and all would be lost. Time stretched. Each second felt eternal. She closed her eyes briefly, holding her breath, hoping the shadows would protect her. Finally, the footsteps passed. The pursuers had moved in another direction. She didn't move until she was sure they were gone. When she finally allowed herself to exhale, tears rolled down her cheeks, not from weakness, but from relief. She had survived another close call, and every close call brought her closer to her children. Dawn broke slowly. Light filtered through the canopy, weak and pale. She pushed herself forward again, exhausted but determined. Hunger and cold were still her enemies, but so was doubt. She forced herself to focus only on survival, step by step, inch by inch, towards hope. Hours of moving led her to a small stream. She collapsed beside it, drinking the cold water, letting it revive her. The reflection staring back at her face was haunting. Mud, scratches, bruises, but eyes alive with fire. Eyes that would not give up. Eyes that remembered her children. Every memory was a weapon now. Every heartbeat a reminder. She survived for them. Every ache, every fear, every tear was worth it if it meant one day holding them again. The forest stretched endlessly. Danger remained close behind. Every sound could be a threat, but she moved, she survived, she endured, because a mother's love doesn't allow pause, doesn't allow surrender. And somewhere far away, the sound of men searching, of horns signaling the hunt, reminded her that time was short. She whispered one word into the cold morning air. "I'm coming." And she vanished deeper into the forest, alone, hunted, but unbroken.
The forest was darker now. Morning had barely touched the trees, and mist curled along the ground like pale fingers, hiding the earth and everything on it. She pressed herself against a thick tree trunk, her breath shallow, chest burning. Every sound seemed amplified. Every crack of a twig underfoot felt like a gunshot in the quiet woods. She remembered the sound of the horn earlier, the signal that the men had noticed her escape. That horn had been the heartbeat of her fear. Now she moved cautiously, each step measured, sliding behind fallen logs and under low-hanging branches, trying not to make a single sound. Her mind raced as fast as her legs. She imagined the faces of her children, alone, afraid, waiting somewhere she could not yet reach. That thought kept her moving, even as exhaustion threatened to collapse her. Hunger clawed at her stomach. Her arms ached from climbing over roots and rocks. Her legs burned with every stride, but she could not stop. Every so often, she froze, convinced she heard a horse, a shout, a footstep. She could almost feel eyes on her back, and every time, fear threatened to paralyze her. She swallowed it down, focused on the path, and forced herself to keep moving. A memory struck her like a lightning bolt. Her youngest child, laughing, had once hidden behind a tree while she pretended not to see him. That memory, so tender and small, was now a weapon, a reminder of why she could not fail. She stumbled into a small clearing and nearly fell. Her body screamed at her to rest, but she ignored it. Every moment wasted meant a step closer to capture. She moved to the far edge of the clearing, pressing herself against the base of a tree. Branches swayed overhead, rustling with the wind, hiding her. But the forest felt alive, almost as if it were watching, breathing with her. Suddenly, a sound broke the fragile silence. A twig snapped nearby. She froze, heart hammering violently against her ribs. Slowly, she turned her head. There, just beyond the brush, she saw movement, a shadow, men searching, their voices low, careful, but unmistakable. They were close, too close. Panic rose, but she forced herself to stay calm. One wrong move could cost her life. She remembered all the lessons she had learned in these past days. Move quietly, use the shadows, trust the forest. She took a deep breath, listening, feeling, sensing the rhythm of the hunt. Hours passed in that way, crouched, crawling, sliding through mud, hiding behind trees, her muscles screaming in protest. Hunger was constant, but more dangerous was fatigue. Every step risked giving away her presence. Every misstep could be the last. Night fell again. Darkness engulfed everything. The moon offered faint light, barely enough to see the shapes of trees and rocks, but enough to navigate. She crept forward, moving silently through the underbrush. The men's torches could appear at any moment. She imagined them shouting, dogs baying, chains clinking. She could almost hear it all. Memories of her children became sharper, her daughter's tiny fingers, her son's laughter, the way they held her hand when afraid. Each memory a dagger and a shield at the same time. Pain mixed with hope, fear with determination. It was almost unbearable, yet it drove her forward. At one point she slipped near a stream, falling into the cold water. The icy current pulled at her, threatening to knock her off balance. She gasped, lungs burning, teeth chattering, but she dragged herself to the other bank. She could not allow herself to stop. Not now, not ever. Somewhere in the distance she heard voices, low, deliberate, searching, men calling out for her, their words carrying through the trees. Fear surged. She pressed herself flat against the mud, covering her face with her arms, trying to disappear. She closed her eyes for a moment, whispering her children's names, drawing strength from them. Suddenly, a dog barked, loud, sharp. The sound split the air. She froze, every nerve on edge. The men were near. She could hear the rustle of their clothing, the soft click of boots on fallen leaves. Every second stretched into eternity. Then, silence. The dog had moved on, or had it not yet discovered her? She didn't dare move. Her entire body was rigid, muscles locked in fear. She could feel her heart trying to burst from her chest. Eventually, the footsteps faded. She exhaled slowly, relief flooding through her. But she could not celebrate. Not yet. She was far from safe, far from her children, far from freedom. She moved again, slower now, but careful, every step calculated, every breath measured. She could not afford mistakes. A flashback hit her suddenly, the day she had been separated from her children, the wagon, the shouting, the chaos, their tiny hands reaching for her, fading into dust. That memory so sharp, so raw, it made her knees buckle. She sank to the ground briefly, leaning against a tree, sobbing silently into her hands. No sound could escape. The forest would not betray her. After a few moments, she rose again. Tears blurred her vision, but she focused on movement, focused on survival, focused on finding them. Every ache, every tear, every heartbeat was a step closer. She stumbled into another clearing. Moonlight reflected on the dew-laden grass. The forest was quiet, too quiet. She felt the weight of solitude crushing her. Yet in that solitude, she found determination. She whispered softly, "I will find you. I will not stop." Hours later, as dawn approached, she found a narrow path leading to higher ground. Her muscles screamed, her clothes clung to her like chains, hunger clawed at her stomach, but she climbed, one step at a time. The higher ground offered a vantage point. From there she could see the forest stretch endlessly, mist purling around distant hills. And then she saw it, smoke rising from a faraway settlement. Could it be? People? Life? Hope? She did not know, but it was something to move towards, something real, something that reminded her why she had survived this far. But danger was relentless. The hunters were close. She could hear them shouting in the distance, dogs baying, footsteps approaching. Every step could be her last. And then, just as she thought she might have a moment of reprieve, a shout pierced the air. One of the hunters had seen something, a flicker of movement, a shadow too large, too human. Her heart raced, every muscle tensed. She needed a plan. Every second counted. She had come so far. She could not fail now. She ran, not blindly, but with precision, moving through the trees with practiced care. Branches scratched her skin, roots tripped her. Her breath came in short, harsh bursts. Fear and hope collided inside her. She didn't look back, because looking back meant surrender. Every step was for her children. Every heartbeat was for their faces, their hands, their laughter. Each drop of blood, sweat, and tears was for them. The forest grew thicker, the path less clear, but the fire inside her burned brighter than exhaustion, fear, or despair. She ran for them. She ran for life. She ran for hope.
She ran until her lungs felt like they would tear apart. Branches lashed against her face. Thorns clawed at her dress. The earth beneath her feet shifted from mud to rock to fallen leaves, each step threatening to send her crashing down. Behind her, shouting. Closer now, not distant, not imagined. Real. "They went this way!" The words sliced through the forest like a blade. Her heart pounded violently against her ribs. The sound of dogs barking grew sharper, more urgent. They had picked up something, a scent, a trace, a mistake. She forced herself to think. Panic would kill her faster than the hunters ever could. The forest thickened ahead, but to her left she heard the rush of water, strong, steady, relentless. A river. If she could reach it, she could break the dog's trail. She veered sharply toward the sound. Behind her, a gunshot cracked through the trees. The sound exploded in the air, birds scattering upward in panic. The bullet struck bark inches from her shoulder, splintering wood across her skin. She didn't scream. She didn't stop. She ran harder. Her breath came in broken gasps now. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. Every muscle burned. She hadn't eaten properly in days. Sleep had abandoned her. Her body was at its limit. But her heart wasn't. Because in her mind, she saw them again. Her daughter crying in the wagon. Her son reaching for her. Mama. The memory hit her so hard it felt like a physical blow. And suddenly she wasn't just running from men with guns. She was running toward her children. The river burst into view through the trees, wide, violent, churning with rainwater from the storm. It was stronger than she expected, dangerous, maybe deadly. Behind her, the dogs barked louder. She had seconds. If she stayed, she'd be caught. If she jumped, she might drown. For a split second, fear wrapped around her throat. Then another gunshot. Closer. She didn't think anymore. She jumped. The river swallowed her whole. The cold was unbearable, like knives stabbing into her bones. The current yanked her downstream instantly, dragging her under. Water filled her nose, her mouth. She fought to surface, arms thrashing, lungs screaming for air. She broke through for one desperate breath before the current flipped her again. Above the roar of water, she faintly heard shouting on the riverbank. They were watching, waiting, maybe hoping the river would finish their job. Her body slammed against a submerged rock. Pain shot through her side. For a moment, everything blurred. Darkness threatened to close in. Not like this. She couldn't die like this. Not before seeing her children again. With every ounce of strength left in her, she pressed her head against the rough bark of the tree and whispered, "Wait for me." The next morning came with pale light and aching muscles. Her body protested every movement, but something had changed inside. The river had not taken her. The hunters had not caught her. She was still here, still moving north. By midday, she reached higher ground again. From there, through gaps in the trees, she saw something that made her heart stop. Smoke. Not from a plantation. Different. Gentler. Smaller. A settlement. Maybe free land. Maybe danger. Maybe hope. She didn't know. But she knew she couldn't survive alone much longer. As she moved cautiously toward it, a sound behind her made her freeze. A single twig snapping. Not loud, not careless, deliberate. Her pulse spiked. Slowly, she turned. Between the trees, not far, stood a man. Not dressed like the hunters. No uniform, no gun raised. Just watching her. Her mind raced. Friend? Enemy? Trap? She was too weak to run again, too tired to fight. The man stepped forward slowly, hands visible. "I won't hurt you," he said quietly. She didn't answer, didn't trust words anymore. He looked at her torn clothes, bruised skin, shaking body. "They're looking for you," he added. Her breath caught. So he knew, which meant others knew too. For a moment, fear surged again. But then he said something that changed everything. "You're not the first." Silence filled the space between them. He nodded toward the distant smoke. "There are people who help." Help. The word felt foreign, dangerous, beautiful. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She had survived the hunt, but the journey wasn't over, not even close. Somewhere north, farther than she could imagine, her children were still waiting. And now, for the first time, she might not be alone.
She did not move at first. The sound of the distant horn rolled through the forest like a warning from the past, and every instinct inside her screamed to run again. Her body, however, refused. Her legs trembled from exhaustion, her ribs ached with every breath, and the cold from the river still lived deep inside her bones. The man standing a few steps away watched her carefully, as if he understood that one wrong movement would send her fleeing back into the trees. He kept his hands open, his voice low and calm, speaking slowly so she could hear the meaning behind the words instead of the fear inside her own head. He told her again that there were people nearby who helped runaways, people who hid them, fed them, and guided them north. She wanted to believe him, but belief had become dangerous. Trust had once been normal in her life, and it had been taken from her piece by piece until survival meant doubting everyone. Still, the horn echoed again, closer this time, and she knew the hunters were still searching. Staying alone meant dying slowly in the forest. Taking a risk might mean living long enough to see her children again. That thought made the decision for her. She nodded once, barely, and followed him. They moved carefully through the trees, avoiding open ground. He walked ahead, but never too far, stopping often to listen. The forest felt different now, less like a prison and more like a path, though danger still hid behind every sound. After nearly an hour, the trees thinned, revealing a small clearing where two rough cabins stood near a low fire, sending smoke into the gray sky. A woman stepped outside when she saw them approach. Her eyes immediately fell on the torn dress, the mud, the bruises, and the exhaustion written across her face. There were no questions at first, only quiet understanding. The woman wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and guided her inside, where warmth hit her skin so suddenly that her knees nearly gave out. She hadn't realized how close she had come to collapsing. Someone handed her water. Someone else brought food. Her hands shook as she ate, every bite reminding her how long she had been running on nothing but fear and hope.
For the first time since escaping, she allowed herself to sit without listening for footsteps behind her. But safety did not bring peace. The moment her body relaxed, memories returned stronger than before. She saw her children again, not as memories now, but as questions. Were they safe? Were they scared? Did they think she had abandoned them? The thought cut deeper than any wound she carried. Tears slipped down her face before she noticed them, and the woman beside her gently squeezed her hand, saying nothing, understanding that some pain could not be comforted with words. That night, as darkness settled outside, the man explained the truth. The hunters would not stop quickly. Escapes like hers embarrassed the men who claimed ownership over others, and pride made them dangerous. Patrols would spread across the area, roads would be watched, anyone helping her could be punished. The only chance was to keep moving north, traveling at night, hiding by day. There were safe places along the way, people who passed messages quietly, guiding those who escaped toward freedom. The journey, he warned her, would be longer and harder than anything she had already survived. She listened silently. Harder did not scare her anymore. Losing her children did. Later, lying near the fire, she stared into the flames while the others slept. The warmth should have comforted her, but sleep refused to come. Every crackle of burning wood reminded her of the life she had lost. She thought about the moment she had been separated from her children, the helplessness, the screaming, the feeling that her heart had been torn from her chest. That memory no longer weakened her. It hardened something inside her. She realized that she was no longer running only to survive. She was moving with purpose now. Every step north was a step toward them. Before dawn, they woke her. It was time to move again. The sky was still dark as they left the clearing, the air cold and silent. The man guided her along narrow paths that avoided main trails. Sometimes they walked through shallow streams to hide their tracks. Sometimes they waited motionless while distant riders passed. Fear never fully left, but it changed shape. It became focus instead of panic. Days passed this way. Hunger returned often. Sleep came in short, restless moments. Once they heard dogs again in the distance, and she felt the old terror rise in her chest. But this time she did not freeze. She kept moving. She had learned something important in the forest. Fear could follow her, but it no longer controlled her. One evening, as they rested near the edge of another wooded area, the man told her news he had heard from travelers moving south. A group of enslaved people had recently been sold and taken farther north before being separated again. The description matched her children's ages. The words struck her like lightning. They were alive, somewhere ahead of her, closer than she had dared to hope. The exhaustion that had weighed on her for days suddenly lifted, replaced with fierce determination. The journey was no longer endless. It had direction. But hope also brought danger. The closer she moved toward places where people were bought and sold, the higher the risk of being recognized or captured again. The man warned her that not everyone who offered help could be trusted. Some betrayed runaways for money or protection. From that moment on, every stranger became a question she had to answer carefully. One night, as they approached another safe house, something felt wrong. The air was too quiet, no lantern in the window, no signal they had been told to expect. The man stopped suddenly, listening. In the distance, horses moved, not passing by, waiting. Her stomach tightened instantly. A trap. Someone had spoken. Someone had told the hunters where to wait. Without a word, he motioned her to move back into the trees. They turned silently, retreating into darkness just as voices echoed near the cabin ahead. Her heart pounded, but this time it was different. She wasn't the frightened woman running blindly through the forest anymore. She understood the game now. Survival meant patience. They circled wide around the area, walking for hours until the sounds faded behind them. When they finally stopped, she realized something else had changed. She wasn't just being helped anymore. She was enduring, adapting, becoming stronger with every mile. As dawn began to break, pale light spreading through the trees, she stood on a ridge overlooking land she had never seen before.
Somewhere beyond that horizon were her children. The distance still felt impossible, but for the first time, it also felt reachable. She closed her eyes briefly and whispered their names into the morning air. "I'm coming." Behind her, far away, a gunshot echoed faintly through the hills. The hunters were still searching, but now so was she, and she was no longer running without direction. She was moving toward home.
She did not look back when the gunshot echoed through the hills. By now, she understood something important. Fear wasted energy, and energy meant survival. The ridge behind her disappeared as she followed the narrow trail deeper into unfamiliar land. The air felt colder here, the forest quieter, as if even the wind moved carefully. Every step forward carried both hope and danger. Somewhere ahead were her children. Somewhere behind were men who believed she still belonged to them. The man guiding her slowed as the sun began to rise, signaling for silence. They moved off the trail and crouched behind thick brush while two riders passed in the distance. She watched them carefully, her body tense but controlled. Days ago, she would have panicked. Now she observed, waited, breathed slowly. She had changed. The forest had changed her. Survival had shaped her into someone stronger than the woman who first ran into the night. By afternoon, they reached another hidden place. Not a cabin this time, but an abandoned barn partially swallowed by vines and thyme. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and dust. A small lantern burned low in the corner, and an older man stepped forward from the shadows. He nodded once, saying little, but his eyes showed recognition. He had seen others like her before, broken, exhausted, but unwilling to stop. She was given dry clothes and a place to rest. As she sat in the quiet, exhaustion finally caught up with her. Her hands still trembled slightly, and bruises along her ribs darkened beneath her skin. Yet her mind refused to rest. The closer she moved north, the stronger her thoughts of her children became. She imagined their faces constantly now, not as memories fading away, but as something pulling her forward. That night, while the others spoke in low voices, she learned more of the journey ahead. The path would grow more dangerous. Slave catchers often waited near towns and crossings, watching for anyone traveling alone or moving at night. Some people helped out of kindness, others helped for money. Trust had to be earned slowly, carefully. One mistake could undo everything. As she listened, a question she had buried finally rose to the surface. "What if I'm too late?" The words came out softer than she expected. The older man looked at her for a long moment before answering. "A mother who keeps moving is never too late." She held on to those words as darkness filled the barn. For the first time in many nights, sleep came. Not peaceful, but deep enough to restore strength. When she woke before dawn, something inside her felt steadier. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her decisions. Purpose did. They left before sunrise. The journey now required crossing open land where hiding was harder. They moved quickly between tree lines, stopping often to listen. Hours passed in silence until distant voices drifted across the fields. She froze instantly. The sound carried clearly in the still air. Men laughing, horses shifting, a patrol. They dropped low, crawling through tall grass until the voices faded. Dirt clung to her hands and face, but she didn't care. Every close call reminded her how fragile freedom still was. Later that evening, they reached a small farmhouse where a woman greeted them with nervous urgency. She ushered them inside quickly, closing the door behind them. Food was placed on the table, but the atmosphere felt tense. The woman kept glancing toward the windows, listening for sounds outside. Something was wrong. Her instincts screamed before anyone spoke. Danger. The man guiding her noticed it too. His jaw tightened slightly.
When the woman finally spoke, her voice shook. Riders had been seen nearby asking questions. Descriptions were being passed around. A woman traveling north, injured, alone. Her. The room fell silent. For a moment, fear threatened to return in full force. She imagined chains again, separation again, losing everything she had fought for. But then another feeling replaced it. Anger. Not loud, not wild, but cold and steady. She had survived too much to be taken now. They left the farmhouse earlier than planned, moving under heavy clouds that hid the moon. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, turning roads into mud and washing away tracks. The storm slowed them, but it also protected them. The sound of rain covered their movement. Hours into the night, as they crossed a narrow wooded path, she stumbled, her injured side flaring with pain. The man caught her before she fell completely. For a brief moment, exhaustion overwhelmed her. She wondered how much longer her body could continue. Then she remembered her daughter's voice. "Mama!" The memory pushed her forward again. Near dawn, they reached higher ground overlooking a small town in the distance. Smoke rose from chimneys, and faint lights flickered through morning fog. Somewhere beyond that town, the man told her, was a contact who might know where recently sold children had been taken. The words made her heart race. She was closer than ever. But closeness brought risk. Town meant people, questions, eyes watching. As they prepared to move again, a sound carried up from below. Dogs barking. Her blood ran cold. The hunters had not stopped. They were following the trail north. She looked toward the town, then back toward the forest behind her. The journey was reaching a turning point. Soon she would have to step out of hiding completely. Soon she would have to risk everything openly to find her children. The sun slowly rose, painting the sky pale gold. She tightened the blanket around her shoulders and took a deep breath. She had survived the forest. She had survived the river. She had survived the hunt. Now came the hardest part, finding her children before the hunters found her. And as the barking echoed faintly through the valley below, she realized something chilling. This time, running might not be enough.
She did not move when the barking echoed through the valley. The sound carried in waves, distant but real. Not imagination, not memory. Real. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket on her shoulders. The town below looked peaceful in the morning light, smoke rising from chimneys, people beginning their day as if danger did not exist. But she knew better. Peace was fragile, and hunters were patient. The man beside her studied the valley carefully. "If they're this far north," he said quietly, "it means they're desperate." Desperate men were dangerous men. She swallowed the fear rising in her throat. Desperation was something she understood, too. It lived inside her now. They couldn't stay on the ridge. Open ground meant exposure. So they descended carefully toward the edge of town, keeping to tree lines and fences. Every sound felt louder here. A door shutting, a wagon creaking, distant voices. Civilization felt strange after so many nights hiding in forests. At the edge of town stood a small church with weathered white paint and a crooked wooden cross. It looked ordinary, harmless, but this was the contact. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. Sunlight streamed through narrow windows. A middle-aged woman stood near the front pews, pretending to arrange hymn books. She did not look at them immediately. "You shouldn't be here long," she said softly, without turning. The man guiding her answered with a phrase she didn't understand. The woman finally faced them, and her eyes landed on the mother. Recognition. Understanding. Grief. "How old?" the woman asked gently. Her voice nearly broke. 7 and 5. Silence filled the church like smoke. The woman closed her eyes briefly, as if searching memory. "A group passed through 3 weeks ago," she said carefully. "Children matching that age. They were taken farther north, split again near the river trade routes." Her knees weakened. Alive! They were alive! But split again? The pain of separation cut through her chest like fresh glass, but hope burned stronger than before. 3 weeks wasn't forever. 3 weeks meant she still had time. "Where?" she whispered. The woman hesitated. Fear flickered across her face. "There's a buyer near the northern mills. He purchases children young, easier to control." The words made her stomach twist. Control. She forced herself to breathe. "I need directions." Before the woman could answer, the church door slammed open. All 3 of them turned sharply. 2 men stood in the doorway, hats low over their eyes, mud on their boots. Travelers or hunters. The air shifted instantly. One of the men scanned the room slowly. His gaze paused on her. Too long. Recognition sparked. Her heart stopped. "There she is," he muttered. Everything exploded at once. The man beside her lunged forward, knocking over a bench to block the aisle. The woman from the church shouted toward a back door. Gunfire cracked through the wooden walls, splintering the pews. She ran, not blindly, forward, through the back corridor of the church, into a narrow alley behind it. Her lungs burned immediately. Her injured side screamed in protest, but adrenaline drowned the pain. Behind her, boots pounded against wood. They were close, too close. She darted between 2 buildings, slipping on loose gravel, nearly falling. A bullet struck the wall beside her, showering her with dust. Her mind flashed with images of her children, not as memories, as goals. She couldn't fall now. She couldn't fail now. She burst out into the edge of town where carts and wagons were lined up near a muddy road. People shouted in confusion. Someone screamed. Horses reared. Chaos became her shield. She ducked under a wagon, crawling through mud as another gunshot rang out. The men shouted directions to each other, trying to cut her off. One of them rounded the wagon and grabbed her arm. His grip was iron. For a split second, everything froze. This was it. Chains again. Separation again. Her children growing up believing she never came. Something primal erupted inside her. She twisted violently, sinking her teeth into his wrist. He yelled in pain, loosening his grip just enough. She drove her elbow backward with every ounce of strength left in her body. He stumbled. She ran. Out of town, toward the tree line. Gunshots followed her into the forest. Branches tore at her face again. Roots tried to trip her again, but she was faster now, stronger, fueled by something beyond fear. The barking resumed in the distance. More hunters. The entire area would soon be searching. She didn't stop until the town sounds disappeared completely. Only when silence returned did she collapse behind a fallen log, chest heaving, vision spinning. She had almost been taken again. Her hands shook uncontrollably now, not from cold, not from hunger, but from how close she had come to losing everything. Tears blurred her sight, but through the tears, hope still stood. She now knew where to go. The northern mills, the river trade routes. Her children were somewhere beyond that horizon. The churchwoman had risked everything to give her that information. She could not waste it. As the sun began to lower behind the trees, she forced herself upright again. Every muscle protested, her body begged for rest, but her heart beat with clarity. She was closer than she had ever been. Behind her, faintly, a horn echoed once more through the woods. They were tightening the search. Good. Let them search. Let them chase, because this time she wasn't just running to survive. She was running toward her children. And nothing on this earth was stronger than a mother who had almost lost everything. She stepped deeper into the northern forest, alone again, hunted again, but no longer afraid of the ending, because now the reunion was possible, and hope, once fragile, had become unstoppable.
She moved through the forest long after the sun disappeared, guided only by instinct and the faint glow of moonlight slipping through the trees. Every step hurt now. Her body had gone beyond exhaustion, running only on will. The direction was clear in her mind. North, toward the mills near the river trade routes. The place where children were bought, sold, and separated like belongings. the place where her children might still be waiting, frightened and alone. The forest felt different tonight, quieter, heavy, as if the world itself understood she was nearing the end of something. Behind her, the hunters were still searching. She could feel it. The pressure never truly left, but something inside her had changed again. Fear no longer made her hesitate. It sharpened her focus. By dawn, the trees began to thin. The smell of water carried through the air, strong, industrial, mixed with smoke. She climbed a small rise and saw it at last. The mills. Large wooden structures stood along the river, wheels turning slowly in the current. Smoke rose from tall chimneys, and wagons moved in and out along muddy roads. Workers walked between buildings, heads down, moving without energy. The sight made her stomach twist. This was not freedom. This was another place where lives were controlled. Somewhere in that place were her children. Her heart began to pound so hard she thought it might give her away. She dropped back into the trees, forcing herself to think. Running straight in would be suicide. She had come too far to lose everything now. She waited. Hours passed as she watched from hiding, studying movement, learning patterns. Wagons arrived in the morning. Workers gathered near the main building at midday. Children, small figures, were moved between structures under supervision. Every time she saw a child, her breath caught, hope rising and falling painfully. Then, near late afternoon, it happened. 2 children were led across the yard by an older man, a boy and a girl. The girl stumbled slightly, and the boy reached for her hand. Her vision blurred instantly. She knew that movement, that protective instinct. Her son. Her knees nearly gave out beneath her. A broken sound escaped her throat before she could stop it. Months of fear, pain, and running crashed into one overwhelming moment. They were alive, thinner, dirt on their faces, moving slowly, but alive. She pressed her hand over her mouth to stop herself from calling out. One mistake would destroy everything. Tears streamed silently down her face as she watched them disappear into one of the buildings. For several minutes, she couldn't move. Relief and agony mixed inside her chest. She had found them, but finding them was only the beginning. Taking them away would be the real battle. As evening approached, she moved closer, staying hidden behind stacked lumber and wagons. The sounds of the mill changed as night workers replaced the day shift. Lanterns were lit, shadows grew longer. She waited for darkness. Every second felt endless. Finally, night settled over the river. The noise of machinery softened. Fewer men walked the yard. This was her chance. She slipped from shadow to shadow, heart hammering, every sense alert. The building where she had seen the children stood near the river's edge. A single lantern burned near the door. Voices came from inside, tired, careless. She circled to the back, finding a loose plank where the wood had warped with age. Slowly, carefully, she pushed it aside. Inside, children slept on rough blankets spread across the floor. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Then she saw them. Her daughter curled on her side, her son lying close beside her, as if trying to protect her even in sleep. The world went silent. All the running, all the fear, all the nights alone in the forest led to this single moment. She stepped inside. The floor creaked softly. Her son's eyes opened first. Confusion filled his face, then disbelief. "Mama?" The word shattered her completely. She dropped to her knees, pulling both children into her arms. They clung to her instantly, small hands gripping her clothes as if afraid she might disappear again. Tears came freely now, hers, theirs, quiet but unstoppable. "I'm here," she whispered again and again. "I came back. I told you I would." For a few seconds, nothing else existed. Then reality returned. Footsteps outside, voices getting closer. She pulled back, wiping tears quickly. There was no time. Reunion had to wait. Survival came first. "We have to go," she whispered urgently. Her son nodded, suddenly serious. He understood more than a child should have to understand. She lifted her daughter, took her son's hand and moved toward the opening she had created. The night air hit their faces as they slipped outside. They had taken only a few steps toward the tree line when shouting erupted behind them. Someone had seen.
Lantern light swung wildly across the yard. Men shouted orders. A gunshot split the night. She ran, not alone this time, small hands in hers, small footsteps struggling to keep up. The forest ahead looked darker than ever, but it also looked like freedom. Branches snapped behind them as the chase began again. Dogs barked, men shouted, the river roared beside them. Her daughter cried softly, exhausted, but she kept moving. She would carry them if she had to. She would fight if she had to. Because this time, she wasn't running toward hope. She was running with it. As they disappeared into the trees, the moon broke through the clouds, lighting their path for just a moment. Behind them, the hunters followed. Ahead of them, uncertainty. But for the first time since the nightmare began, her children were in her arms. And no matter what happened next, she knew one truth with absolute certainty. She would never let them be taken again.
They ran until the sounds behind them blurred into the night. Branches tore at their clothes, roots caught at their feet, and the forest swallowed them whole. Her son struggled to keep pace, breathing hard, while her daughter clung to her shoulder, half awake and trembling. Every instinct inside her screamed to stop, to rest, to breathe, but she knew stopping meant losing everything again. Behind them, the shouting grew louder. Lantern light flickered between the trees. The hunters had seen them clearly this time. They knew she had the children, and that made her more valuable than ever. "Mama, I'm tired," her son whispered, his voice shaking. She squeezed his hand tighter. "Just a little farther," she said softly, though she didn't know how far that was. She only knew forward. The forest sloped downward toward the river, the sound of rushing water growing stronger with every step. Moonlight broke through the clouds, casting silver light across the ground. For a moment she remembered the night she had jumped into the river alone, terrified, desperate, unsure if she would survive. Now she was not alone. Now she had something to protect. The river came into view, wide and fast-moving, too dangerous to cross with the children. She turned along its edge instead, hoping the sound of water would hide their movement. Her lungs burned, her legs trembled, but she refused to slow down. A gunshot echoed. The bullet struck a tree ahead, splintering wood. Her daughter cried out, burying her face against her neck. "It's okay," she whispered, forcing calm into her voice. "I've got you." But she knew they couldn't outrun horses forever. They needed help. They needed hiding. And then, through the trees ahead, she saw it, a faint lantern swinging slowly near the riverbank. She froze. Trap or salvation? A voice called quietly from the darkness. "Over here!" The man stepped forward, hands raised. Not a hunter, not armed, another face from the hidden network that helped runaways move north. The churchwoman must have sent word ahead. "There's a boat," he said urgently. "Quickly!" She didn't hesitate. They followed him down the muddy bank where a small wooden boat waited, barely visible in the shadows. The river churned violently, but it flowed north, away from the mills, away from the hunters. The man helped the children inside first. She climbed in last, her body shaking from exhaustion as he pushed them off the shore. Moments later, lantern light burst through the trees behind them. The hunters had arrived. Shouts filled the air. Another gunshot cracked across the water, the bullet splashing uselessly beside the boat as the current pulled them farther away. She held both children close as the river carried them into darkness. For the first time since the chase began, the distance between them and the hunters began to grow. Slowly, surely. Silence replaced shouting. The only sound left was the river itself. Her son looked up at her, eyes wide. "Are we safe now?" She swallowed hard. Safety felt like a fragile word, but she kissed his forehead gently. "We're getting there." Hours passed as the boat drifted through the night. The children eventually fell asleep against her, their breathing soft and steady. She stayed awake, watching the shoreline, afraid that if she closed her eyes, the nightmare might return. But it didn't. As dawn approached, the sky slowly turned pale gold. Mist rose from the river, and the world felt different, quieter, lighter.
The guiding the boat pointed ahead where land opened into wider fields. "Beyond that," he said softly, "there are people who will hide you. After that, freedom." The word felt unreal. Freedom. She looked down at her children sleeping in her arms. Weeks ago, she had run into the forest with nothing but fear and hope. She had nearly drowned, nearly been captured, nearly lost herself. But she had kept moving, because a mother's love refused to stop. When the boat finally touched the northern shore, her legs trembled as she stepped on land. The ground felt solid beneath her feet in a way it never had before. No chains, no shouting, no one chasing, just quiet morning air. Her daughter woke slowly, blinking at the sunlight. "Mama, we going home?" Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they were different. "Yes," she whispered, "we are." She didn't know what home would look like yet. Life would not suddenly become easy. The past would not disappear. But they were together, and together meant survival. Together meant a future. She took both their hands and began walking north, the sun rising behind them, the river carrying away the last echoes of the hunt. For the first time since the night she ran into the forest, she wasn't running anymore. She was finally free. And this time, she was not alone.
The forest was silent now, except for the faint sound of the river rushing nearby. The mother held both children close, their small hands gripping her arms like anchors to her soul. Each step she took carried the weight of weeks of fear, exhaustion, and heartache. Behind her, the hunters' voices had faded, but she knew they could return at any moment. The night sky above was barely lit by the moon, but the stars offered a fragile sense of guidance. Every shadow in the woods seemed to whisper danger, yet every step forward felt closer to hope. She had almost lost herself more than once, her body battered, her mind haunted by memories of chains and separation, but the thought of her children never left her. Hours passed. Every creek crossing, every fallen log, every low branch became a challenge, but she pushed onward. Her lungs burned, her muscles screamed, yet her heart drove her faster than pain ever could. The children, sensing her determination, stayed quiet, trusting her instincts, following her lead without question. Finally, in the distance, she spotted a faint light, lanterns swinging gently near a small riverside settlement. The contact from the church had prepared a safe passage. Now it was real. Freedom was within reach. Her legs trembled as she ran, but the sight of safety made every ache bearable. The contact emerged from the shadows, guiding them into a small rowboat waiting at the edge of the river. "Quickly," he whispered, urgency in his eyes. "The hunters won't stop searching." She lifted her daughter into her arms, while her son climbed beside her. The boat rocked under their weight, the river flowing swiftly beneath. Behind them, the sound of distant voices grew fainter. Gunshots had been fired, but now silence reigned. She clutched her children tightly, tears streaming down her face. Relief, exhaustion, and disbelief all mingled in one overwhelming wave. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to exhale. "Mama," her daughter whispered, sleepy and small. "I'm here," she replied softly. "I promised, remember? I'm here." Hours later, the boat reached the northern shore. Safe hands pulled them onto land. Dawn had begun to break, painting the sky pale gold. They were finally free. No chains, no shouts, no hunters, just the soft whisper of the river and the first warm rays of sunlight. She held both children to her chest, feeling their tiny hearts beat against hers. The nightmare of slavery, running, and hiding was not entirely over. There would be challenges ahead, scars both physical and emotional, but she had achieved the impossible: survival, reunion, and the promise of freedom. As the morning mist lifted, she looked down at her children, and they looked back at her with trust, hope, and the faintest hint of a smile. She whispered to herself, a vow that carried through every fiber of her being: "I will never let anyone take you from me again."
The forest, the river, the hills, everything that had threatened to destroy her now bore witness to her courage, resilience, and love. A mother had risked everything and had won. The journey was far from over, but the future was theirs to claim.